My name is Sophia. I am 29 years old, and, to be honest, until recently it seemed to me that life had finally begun to turn out exactly the way I once dreamed of on quiet evenings over a cup of hot tea when I was only 17 and I thought that freedom was the key to happiness. I lived alone in a cozy, albeit slightly old-fashioned rented apartment on the third floor of a brick house with a peeling facade and geranium-blooming balconies, wrote code at night, worked on projects that brought me not only a stable income, but also a sense of independence, which seemed more important than love, more important than family, and even, frankly, more important than sleep. I earned enough not to count every penny, ate where I wanted, wore what I liked, and could afford spontaneous weekends in the mountains or on the coast, just because I wanted to see how the sea roars in a different way. But one day, 2 years ago, life suddenly took a sharp turn in a direction that I didn't even know about. My parents called me, a call that seemed mundane at first. The phone vibrated in his jeans pocket, and "Mom" appeared on the screen. I answered, expecting to hear the usual thing, that Dad had oversalted the soup again, or that the cat had torn the curtains again. But a completely different voice came on the line. Tired. Stretched. It was like coming from another world, heavier and more adult than the one I lived in. "Sophia," said Mom, pausing. "We need to talk. Can you come over tonight?" I didn't ask any questions on the phone, but something inside had already tightened into a tight ball. By evening, I was standing on the old wooden porch of the house where I spent my entire childhood. The lock clicked, the door opened, and I went inside, immediately smelling the casserole and the faint scent of lilies of the valley, which my mother always loved. They were sitting at the kitchen table, tired and silent. Papers were spread out everywhere, bills, printouts, envelopes. Dad, who was only 58, looked like he was 70. His shoulders slumped, as if the burden he was carrying had finally pinned him to the ground. Mom, nervously fingering the edge of her coffee napkin, looked lost. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting down across from him. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Dad cleared his throat, looked at me with his gray eyes, and said, "I had to leave my job last month. My back is really bad, Sophia. I can't do construction anymore. I was looking for something easier, but I couldn't find anything, and I still have to pay my bills." At that moment, something inside me seemed to snap. I knew, of course, that he had health problems, and I'd heard about lower back pain and injections, which he hated, but until that evening I hadn't really realized how neglected everything was. Mom added softly, as if apologizing, "We are not coping. I only work in the store in the morning. I get very little. We get a maximum of $1,200 per month, and the mortgage alone is $1,800. We just don't have enough." They looked at me, not with a reproach, not with a demand, but with hope hidden behind long years of parenthood and pride. I silently looked around the kitchen, where I once met Grandma's porridge with honey every morning, looked at the living room, where the whole family sat on the couch with a blanket and watched old movies, and at the backyard, where Dad taught me to ride a bike, shouting, "Don't look at the steering wheel, look ahead." And I fell into the grass, laughing. "Sure," I said, "I'll help." A week later, I was packing my things from my apartment. At first it seemed strange, almost surreal, to return to the children's bedroom, when my school certificates were still on the shelves and posters of my youthful hobbies hung on the wall. The room seemed too small, the furniture too low, as if time had stopped. But I put the computer in a corner, set up a workplace, conducted an internet connection, and everything went well. In any case, my job did not require a physical presence in the office, and I could work from anywhere in the country, even from my parents' home. Over time, everything got better. The work went on, the income remained stable. As a developer, I received about $85,000 a year, and even more if I was lucky with the projects. But the main source of pleasure, and to be honest, and strategic peace of mind, were bonuses. When one of my programs was sold to a large technology company, I received a percentage of the deal. Sometimes it was $10,000. Sometimes it's 15. There have been more. All the usual salary went to support the house, mortgage, bills, insurance, groceries. I took on everything without complaining. Because, to tell the truth, I had enough to live on. But there was one thing my family didn't know about, and as I decided then, they shouldn't know. I transferred each bonus to a separate savings account. I didn't tell my parents or my brother about it. Especially my brother. Marcus lived on the other side of town with his wife Sandra and 2 children, and he had always, since childhood, been able to ask in a way that seemed almost cool to refuse. "Hi, Sophia, can you borrow 500? He spoke lightly. "Tommy needs soccer cleats, Sandra wants to redo the kitchen." And then he'd add in a whisper, "And by the way, Sandra's mom needs surgery. We don't have enough for medicine." I helped as much as I could from my salary. But she was silent about the awards. In 2 years, quietly and consistently, almost without looking up from work and never once giving my family the real reason for my peace of mind, I managed to save almost $180,000, an amount that I could only dream of before and which now lay in a separate account, like my personal supply of air, my insurance, my future chance for my own home, maybe a nice apartment in the center, bright, with large windows, on a high floor, so that the view was not on the neighbor's backyard, but on the city, which lived and breathed regardless of my problems. I started looking at options, looking at websites with ads, imagining how I would arrange the living room, and mentally ticking off the boxes. Parquet, yes, a balcony is mandatory, and the kitchen is open, with a bar so that I could drink coffee in the morning, looking out the window, and not hear any more comments like those that sounded every Sunday. Because Sunday dinners have become a real challenge for me, Marcus, Sandra, the kids. Everyone came as if on schedule, and every night like this reminded me how much I was a stranger among my own people. Sandra, my brother's wife, made it clear from the first years we met that she didn't like me, and she did it with such grace that even if she had spat in my face, it would have been less offensive. "Sophia, is this your new shirt?" "What is it?" she said with feigned surprise, as if I had gone out to lunch in a bathrobe. "You dressed like you just came out of the school cafeteria." She liked to throw phrases casually, but with precision, knowing exactly where to hit. I sighed and turned away, and Marcus laughed. "Come on, Sandra just wants to help." "She has good taste," he said with the same expression on his face as when he was a child, when he tried to justify his antics in front of his parents. The worst part was watching Sandra flaunt designer clothes, brag about new shoes, bags, cosmetics, talking about her investments in herself, and emphasizing that a woman should be able to appreciate quality. I looked at her and knew that these purchases were made, including with money that she did not even ask for. Marcus asked for them. "Sophia, can you take some off, huh?" he whispered on the phone. "Sandra urgently needs to buy something for the office, and my salary is late. I'll give it back, honestly." Every time I nodded and said, "Okay," but inside I felt like everything was shrinking, as if I was inhaling air with a taste of iron. I usually tried to disappear as soon as possible after dinner, citing an urgent job or a call from a client. I went up the creaking stairs to my room, closed the door, sat down at my laptop, pretending to be busy, just not to hear those voices that penetrated even through the walls. "She's gone back into her shell," Sandra said, loudly, as if just for me. "She'll never grow up if she avoids real life like that." I bit my lip and kept silent, because I knew that the less I talk, the closer my freedom is. I kept saving up. I built my silence, brick by brick. Very soon I will make the down payment for my housing and I will no longer hear these words. I will not participate in these conversations where I am considered wrong, immature, forever different. Gradually, everything became a kind of routine. I got up early, brewed strong coffee, scrolled through my mail, looked at reports, and immersed myself in the code. Work has always saved me. It didn't have evaluative views. It didn't criticize my wardrobe or give useful advice. In the mornings, my parents were busy. Dad, as always, settled into an armchair with a newspaper or TV, muttering to himself something about politics or the dollar exchange rate, and Mom, hastily getting ready for her shift at the grocery store, had a quick snack at the stove, sighing and straightening her hair in front of the mirror. We rarely talked in the morning, but there was something familiar about this silence. There was no need to explain anything. Almost every evening we gathered in the kitchen. Dinner, albeit a simple one, became the island of stability that the three of us tried to maintain. On nights like this, it even seemed to me that everything wasn't so bad, that we were coping. But then Sunday would come, and the world would turn upside down again. Marcus would drive up to the house in his beat-up car, and Tommy and Emma would jump out screaming, and Sandra would appear right behind them, appraisingly looking around the hallway, the doormat, and my shoes. "Oh, Sophia, are you wearing that sweater again?" She spoke without even trying to hide her mockery. "Are you sure it's the right size for you?" I looked at my sweater, soft, warm, cozy, bought just a month ago. It was my favorite, and maybe it didn't look like it was in a boutique window, but it had everything I needed: warmth, comfort, and no ostentation. "It's comfortable," I said softly. "Convenience is not everything, Sophia," Sandra replied with a smile, smoothing her blouse, which was obviously tailored. "A woman should try to look decent." While the children were running around the house, making a real hurricane, Sandra settled down on the couch, as if it were her house, not her parents', and began to tell her stories about new discounts, a new fitness instructor, about how a friend survived a divorce. Marcus was hanging out in the kitchen with his dad, discussing sports, politics, or complaining about his job once again. "Marcus plows like hell," Sandra said, "and everyone passes him by with promotions. His superiors just don't understand who they keep on their team." I clenched my teeth and reminded myself of those calls when Marcus once again asked for money. "Because the job is under threat, there will be no bonus." The boss crossed out his project again. He was kind, but irresponsible, and Sandra made him almost a labor hero. And that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was when she decided to help me. "You know, Sophia, it's time for you to have a personal life," she began, putting her hand on my knee. "Find someone, have fun, think about the kids. You're not getting any younger." I looked at her and realized that she couldn't see me, couldn't hear me. I didn't need her advice. I didn't want her life. I had mine. I had a job that I liked. The parents I helped. The future that I built with my own hands. I didn't need her approval. I just needed some quiet. A little peace. A little life without this endless family drama. So, having decided to get out of this stuffy, noisy, and increasingly nervous circle of constant remarks, innuendos, and glances for a while, I agreed to Jessica's invitation and went to her country house for the weekend, the cozy one surrounded by pine trees where you could wake up to silence, not someone else's steps behind the wall, where morning coffee smells not of stress, but of freshness and freedom. We talked a lot, laughed, and recalled our university years, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive, not trapped, not forced to be someone I didn't want to be. When I drove up to my parents' house on Sunday evening, with a slight sadness at parting with this silence, the first thing that caught my eye was too many cars in the driveway. The lights were on in all the windows, as if it was a holiday, but it wasn't the light I expected. I noticed toys scattered on the porch, a teddy bear with an outstretched paw, a small car, and a ball stuck under the step. My heart sank. Something was wrong. When I opened the door, the house greeted me with noise, screams, and a crash, as if I had entered the epicenter of a childhood hurricane. Tommy and Emma were running around the living room, screaming and arguing over who would get to the kitchen first, and Marcus was panting as he carried another box up the stairs. Sandra stood in the middle of all this chaos, waving her arms, commanding, as if she was no longer a guest, but the rightful mistress of the house. "What's going on here?" I asked, stopping in the doorway, with a travel bag in my hand, still not fully believing in the reality of what I saw. Everyone, even the children, froze for a second and looked at me as if I was superfluous, as if I hadn't lived here for the last 2 years, paying bills and providing peace of mind in this house. The parents came out of the kitchen, Mom with a tired, guilty face, Dad with downcast eyes. Marcus put the box down by the stairs and smiled at me as if nothing had happened. "Hi, little sister. Here, the plans have changed a little. I lost my job and we can't pull the rent anymore. So," he spread his hands, "we are temporarily here. Until I find something suitable." I slowly looked around at the boxes, the furniture, some bags of clothes. Their "temporary" looked like a major landing on foreign territory. "Are you staying here?" I asked, still not believing. Well, yes, Marcus replied, as if it were something completely obvious. Just for a little while. Until everything is settled. Sandra came up to me, as always with a fake, strained smile. We really appreciate that you let us stay. Truth. Of course, we will need to redistribute the sleeping places a bit. Children don't sleep well on a cot, you know. Your room is just right for them, spacious, with a window. You could move into the little one at the end of the hall. It's quite cozy there. I set my bag on the floor and exhaled slowly. I'm not moving. I need this room. I work from home. I have all the equipment here, good internet, and the necessary conditions. Sandra's smile distorted, became more tense, tougher. Well, I think the needs of the children are more important than your work, she replied icily. And I remind you, I pay the mortgage and all the utilities, I said calmly, feeling a wave begin to rise in me, the one that I had been holding back for so many months. Sandra crossed her arms over her chest and lifted her chin. That doesn't give you the right to be selfish. We are a family, Sophia. A family that didn't even bother to ask if I wanted these guests, I replied calmly, trying not to let my voice tremble. Sandra sighed, took a step back, and called over her shoulder. Okay. Leave your precious room. But don't expect us to thank you. Some people, apparently, do not know how to be attentive, even to their loved ones in need. I turned around and went upstairs, step by step, feeling fatigue creep up my spine with each step. I went into my room, closed the door, leaned against it, and didn't move for a long time. That's how their invasion began, imperceptible, brusque, devaluing everything I've built in recent years. Life has turned into a real nightmare. There was more noise than I could have imagined. Tommy and Emma were running, jumping, fighting, and making cartoon scenes right outside my door. Marcus would hang out on the couch with the TV remote, flipping channels, making calls that always ended the same way, with nothing. Did you call about that position at the IT company? I asked once. He shrugged his shoulders. Not yet. The market is heavy right now. I'm in the process, it just takes time. The weeks passed. And he's still in the process. No interviews, no attempts to move out. Meanwhile, Sandra acted like she was doing us a favor by showing up at this house, like we should be grateful that her couch criticism graced our walls. It became impossible to work. The kids were knocking on my door, screaming right under it, running down the hallway, having soccer games in the living room. One morning, after Tommy had been kicking a ball against the wall next to my room for 20 minutes and I was unsuccessfully trying to set up an important video call, I went out and approached Marcus. Please, I said, holding back my irritation. Can you ask the children to be quieter at least during business hours? He shrugged without looking up from his phone. They're just kids, Sophia. You don't understand because you don't have any. I tried to talk to my parents. Mom, folding her arms on her chest, shook her head. You're exaggerating, honey. Children should play. You don't expect them to sit in silence all day, do you? I'm not asking for silence, Mom. I ask for at least a little respect for my work, I said softly, feeling the hurt tremble in my voice. But no one was listening. Moreover, it seemed that Sandra, after each of our conversations, was deliberately egging on the children. She allowed them to turn on music loudly, arrange cooking games right in the kitchen, where I was making calls, and, looking at me with her polite hostility, raised her eyebrows, saying that you thought of everything yourself. The turning point, the moment when I realized that I could no longer tolerate, explain, or adjust, came 2 months after my life had turned into a series of non-stop noise, frustration, and endless fatigue. That day, I spent most of the morning and part of the day running around. The pharmacy for Mom, the car service for Dad, groceries, some documents, seemingly endless little things, but which drained me of strength, like water flowing out of a cracked vase. When I returned home, tired, with bags in my hands, the first thing I noticed was that the Wi-Fi was not working. At first I thought it was just a glitch, but something inside already told me it wasn't an accident. I went up to my room, opened the door, and went to check the router. And she froze. The Ethernet cable connecting the modem to the computer was cut, smoothly, neatly, like a knife on glass. Two pieces hung down, dangling limply, and next to them, on the floor, lay those same orange scissors that were always kept in the kitchen drawer. I was filled with rage, so much so that even my hands trembled. I ran downstairs with a piece of cable in my hand, as if with evidence of a crime, and standing in the middle of the living room, I asked in a cold but trembling voice, "Who did this?" Sandra was sitting on the couch with her feet propped up on pillows, carefully painting her nails in another trendy shade of wine, and when her gaze slid over the cable, she snorted. "Oh, that? Well, Tommy was probably playing with scissors and got into your room." "Children are children," she said as lightly as if she were talking about a broken toothpick. "It's not funny," I said, feeling my voice start to rise. "I have a deadline tomorrow. I won't be able to work." Sandra shrugged, still blowing air on her freshly painted nails. "Maybe you should lock the door if you're so afraid for your precious computer toys. Maybe you should keep an eye on your child and teach him not to break other people's things," I blurted out, unable to hold back any longer. Everything accumulated during these weeks came out. The fake politeness disappeared from her face instantly. "Don't you dare tell me how to raise my children," she said, standing up. "You have no idea what it's like to be a mother." "And I know what it means to respect someone else's space and things," I replied, clutching the remains of the cable tightly in my hand. "Tommy is 6 years old," she said, almost screaming now. "He doesn't understand all your work stuff. And you, an adult woman, should understand that an accident is when you spill juice, and a cut wire is damage to property. It's not a mistake. This is destruction." At that moment, Marcus and my parents entered the room. They looked wary, as if they could smell an impending thunderstorm. I lowered my tone a little and explained what had happened, expecting at least this time, to receive support. But Marcus just sighed heavily. "Listen, little sister. I'm sorry that you have problems with the internet. But Sandra is right. You don't have children, you don't understand how hard it is to keep an eye on them every second." "I'm not asking you to keep an eye on them every second," I replied, resentment rising in my throat. "I ask you to explain to them that you cannot enter someone else's room. That you can't break someone else's." Mom shook her head, trying to be conciliatory, but I already knew what I was going to hear. "Sophia, he's a boy. Curious. You used to climb everywhere when you were a kid, too." "But I didn't ruin things with scissors, Mom," I whispered. Dad nodded towards the broken cable. "It's just a wire. You can buy a new one. You're overreacting." I stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by the people I loved most in the world, and I felt a chill rise in my chest, icy, like on a January morning. Not only did they not hear me, they sided with Sandra. I, the person who pays for light, water, and a roof over their heads, turned out to be unimportant. After that day, everything changed. My parents almost stopped talking to me, not out of anger, but out of some strange caution. Marcus started avoiding me. And every time Sandra walked by, she gave me a look full of satisfaction, as if she had won a battle that I didn't even want to start. The house, once warm and familiar, has become cold and hostile. I spent more and more time in my room, trying to concentrate on my work, hiding behind headphones and screens, escaping with code and silence. It was supposed to be temporary. But it seemed like it would never end. And suddenly, like a ray of light in the dark, like the first drop of rain before a long, awaited downpour, a bonus came. One of my programs, which I had been working on for almost 6 months, was finally sold to a large technology company. The amount was huge, almost $60,000. I looked at the numbers on the screen and couldn't believe it. It wasn't just income, it was liberation. In addition to what I had already accumulated, I now had almost $240,000. It was more than enough to make my dream come true. I've been secretly working with a realtor for months now. His name was Dave Patterson, an old college friend who, fortunately for me, got involved in real estate and turned out to be not only a professional, but also an incredibly empathetic person. I asked him not to rush, to be attentive, because I was not just looking for an apartment. I was looking for my corner, my world, my freedom. And it seems that he found her. Dave called me 3 weeks after I received the bonus, which became for me not just a monetary reward, but a real symbol of escape from the suffocating atmosphere, from the house that had turned into the territory of other people's interests, from the inner prison where I woke up every morning feeling suffocated. I remember holding a cup of coffee, leaning against the windowsill, and listening to his voice on the phone, which sounded restrained but with a slight tinge of inspiration. "Sophia, I have something that will suit you," he said. "1-bedroom apartment in the center. The building is new, stylish, with security, gym. Ideal for working from home. Do you want to see it?" Of course I wanted to. And when we entered this apartment, I could barely contain my smile. It was spacious and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows, real parquet floors, and most importantly, a separate room, which I immediately mentally furnished with my desk, monitor, and books. It was quiet, high up, and there was freedom in the air. "I'll take it," I said, not waiting for the end of the tour. Dave grinned, but nodded approvingly. The registration process was quick and without a single glitch. I made $100,000 down payment, and the bank approved the mortgage without the slightest hesitation. My stable job, impeccable credit history, and good income did the trick. 2 weeks later, I signed the final documents. I had my own house. The keys are in my hand, new, shiny, smelling of metal and promise. But I didn't tell my family about it. Not yet. I needed time. I needed to get ready. I needed a plan. And then, as if on cue, Jennifer called, my supervisor, a man with whom we had worked together for almost 6 years. "Sophia, I have a suggestion for you," she said. "There will be a major developer conference in Seattle in a couple of weeks. 2 weeks, all expenses are covered. You will be able to meet people from the largest IT companies. I think you should go." I looked around the room. My keyboard was covered with someone's drawing. Emma's doll was lying on the floor. Children were quarreling and running feet could be heard outside the door. 2 weeks away from this house. It sounded like a breath of oxygen. "I'm on my way," I replied without hesitation. When I announced to my family that I was going on a business trip, there was no reaction. No one asked me where exactly I was going, which conference, or when I was returning. It didn't seem to concern them at all. It even made me feel strange. In the house, where they even discussed what kind of hair paste Marcus had bought, not a word was said about my trip. The conference turned out to be incredible. I felt again what it was like to be among my own people, to speak the same language, to share ideas, to laugh at professional jokes that no one in my house would ever understand. I lived in a quiet hotel room where I could read on the balcony, order room service, and, most importantly, not hear any screams, reproaches, or whispers behind my back. I haven't called home in 2 weeks. And, even more significantly, no one called me. When my flight landed and I got into a taxi with pleasant fatigue, I felt strangely calm. I knew I'd be back, just to say goodbye. When the taxi pulled up to my parents' house, I immediately felt something was wrong. The yard looked strange. There were black bags and some boxes lying on the lawn, and for a moment I thought it was just that they had forgotten to take out the trash. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't trash. It was my stuff. My clothes, neatly folded but stuffed in polythene, my books that had fallen out of my bag, a box of magazines that I had kept since school. Everything was abandoned, as if I was a stranger who didn't even have the right to pack. I froze. The suitcase fell out of his hand. I stepped to the door and knocked. There were footsteps and voices inside, and a few seconds later the door opened. They were standing in the doorway, Mom, Dad, Marcus, and Sandra. They looked at me as if I were an uninvited guest, as if I had invaded a territory where no one was waiting for me. "What is it?" I pointed at the bags. My voice was almost calm, but everything was burning inside. Mom looked away, and Sandra took a step forward, with that expression on her face that I had long ago learned to recognize, a mixture of satisfaction and superiority. We made some changes while you were gone, she said with emphasis. Children are growing up, they need space. We've turned your room into a playroom. The real one. With rugs, toys, and safe lighting. I stared at her. You, what? Mom looked up, her voice low and tired. Sophia, the children are growing up. They need a place. There they can play without disturbing the adults. That's reasonable. I stood rooted to the spot, feeling something heavy rise in my chest, but not tears. No, it was clarity. Understanding. This place was no longer mine. And, probably, it never was. We've renovated the basement for you, Dad said with an expression on his face, as if he were offering me a gift that he himself would have dreamed of receiving. He's really in good condition now. I stared at him in disbelief, and my memory already surfaced of gray concrete walls covered with mold spots, a damp smell that ate into clothes as soon as you crossed the threshold, tiny rectangles of windows clogged with dusty cobwebs, and a mobile phone that lost its signal as soon as you were below ground level. There was nothing there but cold, damp, and a feeling like you were in a closet that was mistakenly called a room. We cleaned everything up, Dad continued, trying to smile. They put a bed, a chest of drawers, even a desk lamp. It's not so bad there now. And Sandra, oh, Sandra literally glowed. She was standing a little apart, like an actress waiting for her applause, and when I turned my head to her, she said with pleasure, in which there was not a drop of benevolence. Of course, if you don't like this kind of room, you can always find something for yourself. You're 29 years old, after all. Adults don't live with their parents at this age. I looked at my parents. Deep down, I hoped, no, I begged without words, that they would intervene, that they would say something, that their eyes would reflect that I was the one who helped them all this time, who pulled the house, who provided peace, quiet, and a covered veranda above my head. But they stood with their eyes downcast, as if they couldn't hold my gaze, as if everything I did had suddenly become worthless. I inhaled, and instead of crying, instead of screaming, suddenly, unexpectedly, even for myself, I smiled. A real, clear smile, free from anger. You know what? I said lightly, looking straight into Sandra's eyes. You're absolutely right. It's really time for me to find my own place. She narrowed her eyes, as if she didn't immediately understand what I was getting at. But you know, I'm wondering, how do you plan to pay the mortgage without my help? I added, still cheerfully, tilting my head slightly to the side. Marcus, who had been standing off to the side, suddenly straightened up and said with the same expression he usually wore when he got a B in math and thought it was a reason to be proud. Actually, I found a job last week. And with a good salary. So we can do it without your money. A wave of relief washed over me, soft and strong, like the summer wind when you open the windows in a stuffy room. That's great, I replied, still smiling. I'm so happy for all of you. Well, then, I think it works perfectly for everyone. I'm leaving. They looked stunned. They expected me to object, beg, or at least get angry. And I acted as if they had just released me. Sandra straightened up again and pressed her lips together in her widest, most unpleasant smile. It's time for you to learn how to live on your own, Sophia. My parents were still silent. They didn't try to stop me. They didn't ask where I was going. They did not offer to reconsider the decision. Great, I said, nodding confidently. I'm so glad that we've all come to an agreement. They turned and went back into the house, and I heard the door close behind them. Not a goodbye, not a good luck, not even a thank you for the 2 years I spent carrying all of them, just the dull click of the lock. I took out my phone, found the number of the moving company I had contacted in advance, and pressed the call. Hi, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I need a truck and 2 people to move my stuff. How soon can you be here? In 2 hours, the voice on the other end replied. Perfect, I nodded, despite the fact that no one saw me. While I was waiting, I got in the car and called Dave. I'm moving in today, I said. Yes, right now. After that, I issued utilities in my own name: light, water, internet. Everything was resolved quickly, as if space itself wanted to help me. 2 hours later, the movers arrived, young, strong, and cheerful. It took them less than an hour to download everything that I considered my own in recent years. One small truck contained my entire life in my parents' house. "Where to?" the driver asked when he closed the back door. I dictated a new address and followed in the car, outside the window of which the familiar streets were passing, which seemed completely different today. When we arrived, and the movers began to bring my things into the new apartment, on the third floor of the building with the smell of new paint and the ringing of the elevator, I suddenly felt the tension that had accumulated over 2 years leave my shoulders. I stood with my palms pressed against the door frame, and breathed in the air of a new space in which there were no voices, no glances, no reproaches. The next morning, I woke up in silence. No screeching children, no screams from Sandra, no clatter of dishes, no footsteps in the hallway. Just me, the rustle of the blanket, and the morning light streaming through the windows into my own, finally real life. I quickly settled into my new life, as if everything inside me was just waiting for this, the moment when I could finally straighten my shoulders, breathe deeply and exist without tension, without fear of being superfluous in a house that had long ceased to be mine. My home office became a real refuge. It had more light than I had seen in the last 2 years. The windows looked out onto a quiet street with trees, and there was no sound in the walls except for the soft click of keys. I worked in absolute silence, not looking over my shoulder, not adjusting to the whims of others, not worrying that at the most important moments someone would run into the room with a question, crying or accusing. Productivity jumped as soon as the constant distractions disappeared, and I was surprised to notice that I was not just completing tasks, but enjoying the process, as in those years when everything was just beginning, and I was writing the first lines of code, fascinated by the possibilities. The first thing I did, with cold determination, but without a shadow of guilt, was to block all my family's numbers. Everything. Without exception. I also stopped all payments that I had been regularly making for my parents for many months, or even years: mortgages, utilities, insurance. All this was no longer part of my responsibilities. If I left, it was for real, and they knew about it. The months passed quietly, steadily, almost magically. I completely went into work, started taking on large projects, communicating with new clients, participating in contests, even advising novice developers. And, most strikingly, I once again had the strength and desire to do what I loved, but had long ago pushed into a corner of my soul, forgotten under the yoke of other people's needs. I joined a gym right in the house. It was modern, spacious, without screaming children and queues at the treadmill. I started cooking for myself, not just throwing something into the pan, but with inspiration: creamed soups, pastries, pasta with sauces, which I had previously only looked at on blogs. And even, for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to go on several dates. Nothing serious, just a reminder to myself: I'm alive. I'm a woman. I have the right to romance, to talk over a glass of wine, to laugh. My bank account began to grow rapidly, and every new month I was surprised to see how much I was saving now that I was not supporting 4 adults and 2 children. Almost $3,000 a month went into my piggy bank, and this feeling of financial freedom became a new source of strength for me. I started investing, making vacation plans, flipping through travel catalogs: Tuscany, South Korea, maybe even Japan. I started thinking that in a couple of years I would be able to afford a bigger apartment, with a fireplace, maybe with a view of the water. Life seemed full and bright. And so, one evening, when I was cooking myself dinner, grilled eggplant with pine nuts, my doorbell rang. I shuddered, automatically wiped my hands and went to the door, looking through the peephole. And everything inside me froze. Mom, Dad, Marcus, and Sandra were standing in the doorway. All 4 of them. All together. Confused, but united. My first thought was not to open it. Just turn around and get back to your life. But then curiosity got the better of him, seasoned with a slight chill in his chest. How did they find me? I opened the door, but made no move to let them in. How did you find me? I asked bluntly. Mom lowered her eyes, as she always did when she felt insecure. Jessica said. We just asked. Of course, Jessica. It seemed to her that helping meant telling her everything you knew. I've already made a mental note to talk to her. What do you want? I asked, still not moving. Sandra, as if she was just waiting for the moment when I would step back, abruptly stepped forward and walked past me into the apartment, as if it were her house, as if everything that was happening was just a formality. The others followed her, and suddenly my perfect silence, my hiding place, was filled with their presence again. It's not a bad place, Sandra said, looking around, and I caught a note of envy in her voice. It must be worth a lot. What do you want? I repeated, a little louder this time, without looking away. Marcus hesitated, scratching his head. I lost my job. Again. That was 2 months ago. I wasn't surprised. Sure. And we're not coping with the mortgage again, Dad added. I almost laughed. Let me guess. Do you want me to pay for you again? We're a family, Mom said hurriedly. We have to help each other. Help each other? I asked, looking straight into her eyes. And when did one of you help me? Dad took a step forward, as if he was going to defuse the situation. Look, we know that it was difficult back then. But we can work it out. If you move back, will you help us a little? Back? I interrupted. To the basement? Silence. We were just thinking, Mom said softly. If the bank takes the house away, we may have to move in with you. I stared at her. Excuse me? Where else should we go? Sandra resumed her usual slightly contemptuous tone. We're a family. You can't just turn your back on us. And then I laughed. Really, loudly, deeply, with that laugh that comes not from joy, but from the full, immense irony of the situation. Do you really think I'm going to let you in here? After you threw my stuff out on the lawn and offered me to live in a damp basement? It was different back then, Marcus muttered. You're right. It was. That's when I realized what I mean to you. Nothing. Mom started crying. Sophia, please. We're desperate. You should have thought about that when you decided that I didn't deserve even a simple respect, I said, my voice calm but firm, like icy water in a mountain river. We never said that. Dad protested. But I wasn't listening anymore. You didn't have to say that, I said softly, standing in the doorway, holding her with my hand so that neither of them would take a step forward. You showed it every day. Constant taunts, insults, and neglect. The children who broke my things, ran into my room, screamed, and dirtied the walls, and none of you even tried to step in and protect me, even though I was literally paying for your life. I was not a family member for you, but a banking application with vivid emotions. We were grateful, Mom whispered, clutching the sleeve of Dad's jacket as if it were him. No, I interrupted, you weren't. Gratitude is not just words. Gratitude is about actions. And you thought I had to. You had the right to do that, Mom said suddenly with unexpected directness. Be tired. Evil. But you didn't deserve to be thanked. There is a difference. Sandra wasn't pretending anymore. The fake politeness, the sweet tone she used so hard in public, disappeared like makeup in the rain. And now you know what? I'm sorry, she said. You're exactly who I've always called you. An evil, selfish, cold woman who has no idea what a real family is. I nodded. You're right. I don't understand your version of the family. Where one person does everything, and the rest walk on it like on a carpet, and call it love. In your family, kindness is taken as a duty, and silence is taken as consent. I went to the door, opened it wider, and pointed outside. I want you all to leave. Right now. Sophia, wait, Marcus interjected, stepping forward. Can we just talk about it? Is everything calm, without quarrels? We just did that, I replied, my voice already as hard as a rock. And the answer is no. I'm not coming back. I won't pay your mortgage. I won't let you live here. And I'm not going to help any of you anymore. Never. But we're a family, Mom said, sobbing. The family doesn't treat you the way you treated me. A family doesn't throw your life in black sacks on the grass or offer to live in a damp basement when it occupies warm rooms. Now go away. They left, but not quietly. Sandra hurled as many insults at me as she probably had been saving up for all the time I hadn't answered her. Marcus muttered that I would be sorry. And the parents were the last to go, silent, tired, with that special expression on their faces when people no longer have arguments, only emptiness. I slammed the door behind them and immediately bolted it, as if I was putting not just a lock, but a finishing touch. In the following weeks, they tried again. First they called from unfamiliar numbers, then they started sending messages from other people's phones, then they sent letters from new mailboxes, as if I didn't recognize these familiar words, requests and accusations. Some were polite, others were angry, and others were almost threatening. I didn't answer any of them. Blocked everything. It was as if she was clearing the space, not only digitally, but also mentally. 3 months later, I accidentally learned from a friend that my parents' house had been confiscated. They failed. My parents moved to a tiny apartment on the other side of the city, a cheap neighborhood, old buildings, weak internet. And Marcus and Sandra and the kids moved in with her parents. It was especially funny when you consider how often Sandra said that her mother was a woman who was toxic, interfering, and absolutely unbearable. I heard the news and I didn't feel anything. No pain, no pity, no anger. Just relief. I'm relieved that I left when it was time. My life was only going up. I got a promotion, finally, an official recognition of everything I've done. I started a serious relationship with a man who not only saw me as a woman, but also as a partner with whom I could dream, grow, and build. We traveled to 3 countries in a year. I bought myself a car, the one I've been dreaming about since I was 22, when I was just starting to write code and looked at the world like an unopened book. But most importantly, I finally found out what respect looks like. Not ostentatiously, not out of politeness, not for the sake of anything, but real, when the person next to you sees your efforts, appreciates them and is grateful, even if you just brought coffee or listened to it after a long day. My friends didn't ask, didn't demand. If I helped, they said, thank you, and never made it a habit. Sometimes I wonder if they're wondering how things could have been different. Do my parents think how things would have turned out if they had just once told Sandra, enough is enough? Or if Marcus was really looking for a job instead of holding up with a phone? Or if just once, at least someone had said, Sophia, you're important to us. But then I remember, I'm better off without them. Because there are people who will take everything you give and still say you haven't given enough. Because there are people for whom generosity is a duty and kindness is a weakness. And there are others. I found them. And I don't let anyone else into my life who doesn't know how to keep their hearts safe.